Hey everyone, welcome back. This week I'm working on the retractable skeg system for the boat, and I don't have a retractable skeg and I don't have a retractable skeg design, so I guess that's what I gotta do first, is design my retractable skeg. But before I get into that stuff, let's just talk about what a skeg is. A skeg is just an extra piece of hardware on the back of your boat, and its purpose is to give your boat a little extra directional stability or better tracking, i.e. it makes the boat go straighter. If you don't have it, the boat might turn more easily, or what really happens is it will tend to weathercock, which means to turn into the wind. So it's not something you want to use all the time, or at least not something I want to use all the time, which is why I'm doing it retractable. When the conditions call for a retractable skeg, it's nice to have one. So there's many different shapes for retractable skegs that you could use. For instance, this would be a basic wedge. You know, it sits up in the box like this, and then when you want to deploy it, you just push down. You know, the cable would connect here, and it just travels a couple inches to push it down to deploy it. Another skeg style would be more like this, where you know, it can deploy much further into the water. You know, you'll see these also. And I guess that gets more surface area into the water, so there's more control, or more, you know, more effect, so better tracking. But it does go deeper, so you have to keep that in mind. There's also a good, you know, I've talked about Nick Schade's design from Guillemot Kayaks. That's also a very good design, and probably the one that I'll be most relying on. His uses a more like a surfboard fin shape. I'm not going to use that shape, but the actual mechanics of how it works I like. I did a little bit of prototyping, and this is sort of the idea. Let's see, that's it right there. So this is the pivot point, and so a cable comes into the front of the skeg box. It'll connect about here, and then it pushes down, and this will probably go about 40 degrees to be fully deployed, and that'll be about the shape of my skeg right there. So the cable goes in here, sits up in there, and so it's kind of a wedge. So that's what I'm going to do. This isn't the exact shape though. I modified it just a little bit so that the radius I'm going to use, this arc length for about 40 degrees of travel, will result in about 3.5 inches of cable. So my skeg controller, the knob, you know, plus the 1/2 inch on either side for the actual width of the knob, that comes to about 4.5 inches is how long I want my box. And then the cable will connect in here, and I'll use a set screw to hold it in place. One of the differences between the Guillemot design and mine is I'm going to mount some hardware inside here so that there's no threads being put into the epoxy or into the wood, and so instead it's going to be metal. I could use, you know, something like that, one of these inserts where it screws into your wood or epoxy, and then on the inside it's got threads. But I don't have the right size, so what I have on hand are these rivet nuts. And so that's the right size I have for the set screws that I have, so that's going to go inside like that, and that'll provide the threads for the set screw that's going to press against the cable in order to not have to rely on the threading in the epoxy. And I also want to make sure there's no exposed wood, so there's going to be a lot of epoxy all in here, and then I'm going to drill out to get it all, you know, right. But yeah, that's the basic idea. And that's the design I'm going to do. So we'll see how it goes. Eventually I'll get myself a bigger laser cutter, and then I'll be able to do this straight from the computer to that and have instant gratification. It's kind of funny doing all this CAD design work only to go and cut it out with paper and scissors and then have to cut it out by hand using the jigsaw, but it is what it is. Not a very technically advanced operation. Alright, super rough cut, but that's the basic design with the right dimensions. And yeah, not highly precise, but we'll try to work with it. Okay, so the basic shape, and then I'm marking the positions for that rivet nut and also a piece of tubing for the cable to sit inside, and then the set screw will come through that nut into a hole in the tube and compress the cable inside of it. So the wood isn't getting deformed, there won't be any exposed wood, I don't have to put any threads into the wood or into the epoxy. So this is the plan, and so we're going to get this cut out and filled with epoxy, and then we'll get these exact shapes cut out and we'll insert the metal. I'm going to start working on drilling out the spaces for the hardware, the nuts, and the little piece of the rod that the cable will run into. Well, it's literally over 100 degrees in my garage, so I'm just going to go as long as I can until I eventually melt, and then that's it. Now it's hot. So I want it set in there center. Don't really want it warping the wood too much. I'm going to set it in there with epoxy, and I'm thinking about sticking a dab of hot glue in between there so that epoxy doesn't get in there. I don't want that set screw getting stuck. After it's set in there with epoxy, I'm going to put more wood around it to help strengthen it up. And then I'll drill out there for the set screw, and then I'll drill out there for the cable. And obviously I'm holding it all together with this big set screw right now, but I'll need to be able to bring it out after I drill it. So a dab of hot glue there, or something, maybe just some tape, I don't know. We'll cover that spot. I'll be careful, you know. That's how I roll. Alright, so I've got the hardware in there with the crazy glue, and I've got a little piece of tape to make a dam so that the epoxy won't get in and touch the set screw that's helping to hold it all in place. Then I'm going to cover it over with a layer on each side of extra wood. But before I do that, I'm going to cut the gap for the set screw and back it out before I glue this, just to make sure I don't accidentally epoxy the set screw into it. And now the moment of truth. Let's see if it's already glued in there or if it'll come out. Cross your fingers. That's good news. Okay, next I'm going to cut the channel in the wood to run here for the cable. That's where it comes in, and it'll go inside this tube. And when I cut this, the only thing holding this little piece of wood on will be the crazy glue. So I just got to be a little bit careful. Alright, now I'm going to put 2 pieces of wood on either side of this to bulk it up. And in order to do that, I need to carve out a little bit on each side so that they fit, because this protrudes a little bit from each side. Alright, I've got these little pieces shaved down so they'll fit over this stuff. And then I've also stuck some screws with electrical tape into these holes to block the epoxy so they don't go in there. I'll let that set, and I'll back off the screws a little bit in a little while to help it come out before it sets all the way. Alright, I've got that setting in place, and I'm just crossing my fingers that I don't get these screws epoxied in there. I'll have to try to get in there before it sets all the way to back them out. And then, anyway, while that's doing what it's doing, I'm going to start working on the container, the actual Skeg box. So this is the shape of the Skeg, so we're going to come, farther down, and then outside of it, maybe about 1/2 inch or so, to get the actual shape of the Skeg box. We'll see. Alright, so I've got 2 outer walls of the Skeg box, and it's oversized at the bottom because there's going to be, you need enough to protrude through the hull, and then from outside of the boat you're going to cut it off. But now that I have the 2 walls, I'm going to get the spacers, and I need 3 spacers on the inside. Highly precise. Okay, I've got 3 layers of wood. So essentially I'm cutting out 3 more shapes the size of the walls, but then I'll cut the shapes on the inside too. Alright, these are the outer walls, and these 3 pieces are going to be the spacers. So now that I have that, I can put the piece of paper back on it, and lining it up with that pivot hole. I now see where the edges of the inside of the borders will go for that to fit snug up in there. So we'll get that cut out. Now I don't want it to be the exact shape, so I'm going to give it a little bit of room, but right now I'm just tracing the Skeg on there to just get a general idea of what it's going to look like. 3 edges of the inside of the skeg box. Okay. Groovy. Alright, so it's a little later now and the epoxy's not completely hard, but it's definitely getting there. And so what I want to do next is take these screws out so that they don't end up permanently in there, because if I can't get those screws out, this whole thing's for nothing. So we'll go ahead and it unthreads. That's a good sign. I need that tape to come out though. Oh yeah, look at that. Perfect. It slid right out. That's absolutely beautiful. I think I like it. Does the set screw fit inside? Even if it doesn't, I think it's okay. I can still drill it out a little bit. So this is perfect. All right. Yeah, we can ream that out a little bit, but that works. Cool. That worked. Now I'll just let this sit and get nice and hard, and then, like I said, I'll just ream it out a little bit, but we are smooth sailing. This is going to be the Skeg because this did not get messed up. Don't even ask what I did with this one. For those of you that don't know, epoxy will bond to metal, so be careful. Maybe put some packing tape or something to cover it so that it doesn't stick. But to let it finish out setting, I'm just going to throw a trusty clamp on it, and we'll come back to this later. These are some of the scraps from the inside of the border for the box. So this is wasted wood, so I can chop that. Well, there's your problem. Now we'll fill that up with thickened epoxy. Alright, I'm about to blast the other side of the Skeg box walls. I'll add a little bit more to the spacer, and I'm going to fill this part here of the pivot for the Skeg with thickened epoxy. And any excess that I have, I'm going to start filling up the end pores. So I'll just dump all the excess into this is the stern, and then also I have one on the bow. So there's a little plastic dam, and it'll just fill up in there. I'm back over here in the corner. I got some stuff sanded down a little bit. The actual skeg itself is sanded down, restained, and I need to coat it with fiberglass, so that's what I'm going to do next. And then these parts are fiberglass both sides, so we'll get those trimmed up. And I'm not going to completely glue it up just yet, but I think I'll glue one of them together. So that's what I'm doing right now. A lot of little steps, and then a lot of wait time because of all the epoxy. So here we are. Okay, I'll start by gluing up this skeg box and just coating this entire thing. We don't want any exposed wood. Everything will get coated. This bottom is not as important because it's going to get chopped off once it's in the boat. But all this around here is very important. Okay, this is half of the skeg box. Now, this is 3 layers deep, and the skeg is 3 layers wide, but there's a lot of glass on here, so what I'm worried about is that when it's inside of there, it's just going to be squeezed too much by the box. It'll just rub a bunch. So what I want to do is sand down some of this, maybe take a millimeter off. That'll give it the ability to slide inside of there a little easier. I don't want it to get bound up. Now a couple inches are going to get trimmed off of this, so I think we're going to be fine with clearance, but maybe cross your fingers a little bit. As I've said before, the bottom of this skeg box is going to be cut off once it's inside the boat. It'll be cut flush to the bottom of the hull. But for now, I'm going to trim off the bottom of the box just because curiosity's just killing the cat, and I want to make sure it's all good inside before I get it installed. See, we've got some squeeze out here I need to hit with a file. Probably got to get a file up inside of there a bit. Alright, that's the absolute do not cross line. So this is all I can cut off. So we shall see. Of course, I'm going to fill that with epoxy. Alright, time to cut. Shout out to anyone who's ever chopped a hole in a perfectly good boat hull before. Here we go. It's not so much a saw, more like a, fire starter. Oh boy. Now I cut it tight on purpose and I'll file it down and get it in. Alright, I guess there's no time to stress out. We'll just keep going. And if I'm forgetting anything, well, just remember, when working with wood, there's nothing you can't fix with 50 grit sandpaper. Alright, the crazy glue is only to hold it in place temporarily while I get it flipped over and epoxied in from the inside, then glassed in from the inside. And then I'll come back, cut it flush, and epoxy and glass it from the outside, and hopefully I can make it look beautiful. It's not as clean as the, the experts, but oh boy. You gotta just try it. It's nerve-wracking, but cool. Being that I kind of just eyeballed it, I'm happy to report that we have clearance. I know the deck has about an inch to go when I put it on, so that'll fit in there just fine. The deck will go on no problem. So now we'll get it epoxied into place, cover the whole thing again with glass just to get it nice and clean. We'll put a little bit of epoxy in there and get the whatever that thing's called, that the hose is going to clamp to, and then we can get on with the control knob. Cool. Alright, to try to help with some drips, I've hit it with some tape. Alright, I got it kind of glued into place and a little bit of thick epoxy around it. Now I'm going to give it kind of a thicker fillet to really hold it in. So, get some of this peanut butter on it. Okay, not the prettiest, but I kind of like it. Cool. So we'll get this cut flush, and we'll get it epoxied and fiberglassed and made beautiful and all that stuff. Boy, oh boy, can I make a mess. I don't really have a tool for doing that. I've got a machete. I don't know, that just seems like a terrible idea. Yeah, that's a horrible idea to take a machete to a boat. Alright, maybe not. Alright, I just got back from the store and they didn't have a Japanese handsaw. I had to get an American one. And I got some stronger sandpaper. So we'll just be careful and see if we can zip that off nice and even. Okay. I really don't want to scratch up the hull with the saw blades, so I've got this cutting board I stole from the kitchen. And I think I'll just tape it right there so that the saw rubs on that as I'm going. And then I'll come back and hit it with a nice rough grit sandpaper to clean it all the way down. But this will protect the hull. You'd think I'd never used the saw before. I think I'm actually safer with power tools. Now we'll sand that flush. I only moderately destroyed my wife's cutting board. Whoops. Okay. This is 40 grit. It is the most evil stuff I could find, so I gotta be real careful with this. That's it. Alright, so I'll clean this up some more. And then this whole section is going to get another piece of glass just to kind of fix my mistakes. I made a mess. I got to clean up some extra epoxy. And yeah, we'll work that down a little bit more. But not too bad, I guess. I mean, it's terrible, but you know, for terrible, it's not too bad. What do you think, fish? Before I fiberglass this, I better get all that sawdust out of there. I could give myself a real problem if it gets down in there and turns solid. I'm gonna have to see about that. It's an air compressor, and well, that's technically an air hose fitting. This should work. Okay, technically it worked, so I get credit. Alright, so I kind of scuffed up a little bit with this sandpaper, so I'm going to glass this whole area. Alright. I'm going to let this tack up, and then I'm going to come back, razor blade those hairs right off the middle, and maybe fill the weave. Okay, this is the control cable. It's going to run from the control knob next to the cockpit through a plastic tube into the skeg box and to the skeg. It goes inside of that thing, whatever it's called, and there's going to be a plastic tube connected to that guy. But we're just doing this little test run. So we'll see if we can get that out of there. Okay. So there's that. Alright, so this here is our skeg. And so the part that has this gradual bend is the part that holds the cable. And that's how you can tell it's in there all the way. You just push it in until it stops. Put your fingers there, see how far it went. That looks good. Okay. And then when you put it in, make sure it goes with the hex wrench side accessible. Don't go in backwards. I don't know if you can see that in this little GoPro. Okay. So that goes in here. You can hear it crunching the cable, and since I got metal in there, you can crank that down as hard as you want and it's not going anywhere. Alright, so that's like that. I'll pull the cable back through the thing. Now put it down and hook onto that axis for the pivot point, and So that's fully retracted, fully deployed. Alright, so there's a lot more to do. I got to do the control knob and the control knob slot that's going to be next to the cockpit. But this video is already very long, so we're going to wrap this one up here. There's the Skeg. It's retractable. It's in the Skeg box. Everything's good. We'll be back and look at this again later on after I get the deck and hull together, and you'll see the final assembly. But I'd say for now, well done. Thanks for watching, and if you made it this far, you should definitely be subscribed. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.